The color of education.
The things that are important to you.
The squares. I love the squares.
There you go. There you go. We love you back.
I had to make this a priority to be a part of this show because it's based in my purpose for my existence, for my values.
Thinking man.
You got the thinking man. Yeah.
Welcome to another edition of Grown Folks Business on a Thursday evening. All right. Glad you guys can join. Some of you are in our new promo intro. We're gonna keep that thing going because it shows the people that need to be highlighted because of their consistency and participation. So glad you guys could be here, and I think we have a wonderful topic tonight. And I think our little hiatus, a little fresh and desiring of this level of engagement and this type of conversation. So good to see everyone, Lisa, Julia, without Gregory at the moment, but hopefully he can join in. Meryl, of course, thanks for doing what you do and providing us with the space. And Danya, as always, your skills are much appreciated. Danya's actually done some other work for me that I am happy to report to all of the Grown Folks Business listeners. He's a great designer of logos and such. So another endeavor, another hat I wear is Racial Equity Learning Community Engagement Officer. And he's made us, the RELC community, a wonderful logo. I'm sure you guys will get to peep it at some point. So appreciate that. Tonight's topic is one that is now old news because everything happens and it keeps happening and it's hard to keep up these days, especially now in light of what's going on with Russia invading for whatever reason. I'm blanking on the country, even though I've been talking about it all day.
Ukraine,
yeah. I want to say Kiev so bad, but I know Kiev is the capital. Ukraine. It is pretty frightful time over there. So that's absorbing a lot of our attention in terms of the news cycle. But just a couple of weeks ago, Whoopi Goldberg and Joe Rogan were kind of simultaneously in the news space for reasons that had to do with race, misinformation, disinformation, in some cases purely not knowing exactly how to frame what they were trying to discuss. So tonight's show is called Whoopi and Joe, It's Celebrity Opinion, a celebrity opinion and platform, a recipe for disaster. So we have become, if not, maybe we always have been, maybe this is something that just is on steroids at the moment. The amount of attention we give to celebrities and their opinions. They don't have to be authorities on matters. They don't have to be very learned. They just get to get microphones and say stuff. And there's this desire to be in awe of what they're saying, to the point that when they say something that doesn't quite go down smooth and doesn't quite make sense for whatever the subject they're discussing is, there's an extreme backlash. There's the cancel culture that comes for a lot of people, and Whoopi experienced that to the point where she was suspended for 2 weeks. Joe experienced it to a level and to a degree, but ironically, he had defenders for some of the things that he was exposed for doing in his past. So it was not necessarily a extreme consequence. Whoopi gets 2 weeks immediately, almost immediately, and has to do a mea culpa. Joe Rogan does apologize, but again, he was defended by a number of people. And I'll give complete context to Joe Rogan's situation via me speaking on it, because I couldn't find any clean clips to play concerning what transpired with him. So I'll give voice to that as best I can. And if there's somebody listening that has something to add or take away or challenge, feel free to post those comments, and Danya get them up on the screen. But Joe Rogan was being challenged for his take on COVID, and some of the information he was sharing on his show was being condemned by doctors and people who are more concerned with the health of the nation and have more knowledge of how we may overcome COVID. He's allowed his opinion. That's not anything that I'm challenging in this space or even debating. But he has a microphone, and he has millions of people who listen and hang on every word. But where I'm more focused in terms of what we're discussing and unpacking tonight, there was a moment where N.E.I.R.E., a singer who was desiring of removing her music from Spotify, along with other celebrities, other musicians, Neil Young being one of the principal ones, for this misinformation that was being communicated on Joe Rogan's show. N.E.I.R.E. Also said that she would desire to do it because of something that she was able to, I don't know if she had it put together or somebody did. It was a montage of Joe Rogan using the N-word repeatedly on his show from past years, making some sketchy jokes. And okay, not a good look, but also not anything that hadn't been known before. But Spotify went in and removed all of the shows that had these controversial moments. And Joe Rogan ends up being removed from a UFC fight, which he is one of the lead commentators. He's also the in-ring guy that interviews fighters right after. Disney, who owns ESPN, who was tasked with doing the fight, Disney stepped in and asked that he not participate. So in the lead up to this event, a reporter is engaging with Dana White, who is the head of the UFC, on the podium with the two fighters that are fighting. One of them, his name is Israel something. He's a star fighter. He's a great fighter, really good fighter. The reporter asked Dana White something specific to what's going on with Joe Rogan, and Dana White walks away from the podium, that little, don't ask me nothing that stupid. So the Israel, the fighter, gets the microphone, and this was disturbing to me for multiple reasons, but he's very crass in his delivery. And again, I'm not a counsel guy. I want to make this clear. These are observations I'm making, but where I'm going, I think we'll connect these dots. So this guy just comes to Joe Rogan's defense, and that's my guy. He's this cool MFer, and he's just the top guy, and blah, blah, blah. And he says, when he takes the microphone, let me handle this. I'm a black guy. Now, he's black, but he's Nigerian, and he's emphatic about how supportive he is of Joe Rogan, to the point that he says, I can say this, and this is my support for Joe Rogan's my N-word. That's my N-word. So very appalling to me for multiple reasons. For one, that level of support was totally not called for. I mean, he could have easily said how much he supported Joe without all of the blusterness and crassness. But I think you guys know my feeling on the N-word period, but from a culture standpoint, or from a historical perspective of understanding who bore the weight of that word more so than any other people, it's an American term more than anything else. Its origins and roots lie in the Americas in terms of how effectively it was utilized as a term. So here's a guy who's not from here, doesn't live here, who co-signs Joe Rogan's behavior, but he's not alone. As I've stated many times on this show, Black Americans are the most exploited, and a lot of times by people that look like us, and sometimes by people who are us, because rappers and some other people came to Joe Rogan's defense also. He might be the coolest guy ever, but that's not the point. The point I'm making this evening is the reaction and the punishment that Whoopi Goldberg received makes things understood in terms of what is acceptable behavior towards a minority, oppressed, disenfranchised group. Whereas there's this desire to get over it and get past it when it comes to insulting behaviors toward Black Americans to a certain extent, or Black people in general. So I do have clips that I'm going to play that better contextualize Whoopi Goldberg's situation, and a wonderful response from a Jewish lady who actually, I think, better states what Whoopi was attempting to communicate on The View that day that ended up getting her suspended. So that was a lot to unpack. I hope I was clear in my communication, but I can't find any clips of the Joe Rogan stuff that I'm comfortable playing in this space. But I made my best attempt to communicate what happened with that guy. So with that being said, before I play these clips, because I said a lot, are there any thoughts or questions or ideas, or should I just go into the clips of Whoopi Goldberg? Clips, everybody for the clips. All right, I'm going to play these two clips. They're pretty short. Please pay really good attention to the lady who I'll play second, who is better communicating what she thinks and why she thinks Whoopi reaches the conclusion about some of the things that she said on The View that got her suspended. All right, let's get this share screen thing going. Might be a little out of practice. It's been so long. Let's go. All right.
View co-host Whoopi Goldberg suspended for 2 weeks for her comments about the Holocaust. Ariel Reshef has the story. Good morning, Ariel.
Good morning to you, George. Though Goldberg has apologized, her comments sparked a firestorm, some seeing this as a troubling sign of fading understanding about the horrors of the Holocaust. This morning, ABC News suspending Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks in response to her inflammatory remarks about the Holocaust. ABC News President Kim Godwin saying in a statement, effective immediately, I am suspending Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks for her wrong and hurtful comments. While Whoopi has apologized, I've asked her to take time to reflect and learn about the impact of her comments. The entire ABC News organization stands in solidarity with our Jewish colleagues, friends, family, and communities.
If you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race.
On Monday's show, the host of ABC's The View inaccurately claimed the Holocaust was not related to race.
It's not about race. It's not about race.
What is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about. Whoopi Goldberg.
Goldberg appearing to double down on the Colbert Show that night.
The American experience tends to be based on skin.
Yes. And so that is what race means to me. When you talk about being a racist, I was saying you can't call this racism. This was evil. Mm-hmm. This wasn't based on the skin. You couldn't tell who was Jewish. They had to delve deeply to figure it out.
Then tweeting an apology, saying in part, the Jewish people around the world have always had my support, and that will never waver. I'm sorry for the hurt I have caused. And the next day, opening The View with this.
I said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, and it was instead about man's inhumanity to man. But it is indeed about race, because Hitler and the Nazis considered Jews to be an inferior race. Now, words matter, and mine are no exception. I regret my comments, as I said, and I stand corrected.
At the end of the Holocaust, just 77 years ago, 6 million Jews had been murdered.
That might not fit exactly or feel different than the way we think about race in 21st century America, where primarily it's about people of color. But throughout the Jewish people's history, they have been marginalized, they have been persecuted, they have been slaughtered, in large part because many people felt they were not just a different religion, but indeed a different race.
The head of the Anti-Defamation League warning anti-Semitism is still a real and present danger.
We need people in good faith on the left and the right to call this out forcefully, fully, without hesitation.
And studies show an alarming decline in knowledge about the Holocaust at a time when anti-Semitism has surged to unprecedented levels. The FBI saying Jews are the most targeted for religious-based hate crimes in this country. And George, as you heard there, Goldberg saying she regrets her comments and any hurt they may have caused.
Yes, she did. Okay, Ariel, thanks very much.
What I want to say, and now I want to get to the two things I think that she very clumsily perhaps was gesturing at, that I think are really important to bring up and difficult to bring up. So the first is anti-Black racism is different, and it's worse in America. The history is worse. The current way in which we are still failing descendants of slaves is worse than what any other ethnic minority suffers in America, certainly Jews. I mean, American Jews in this generation, we are the luckiest Jews to ever walk planet Earth. It's ridiculous to compare today. Anti-Semitism is on the rise with forms of anti-Black racism that are still state-sponsored. So that's the first thing that I think she was gesturing at some qualitative level, and I think that I agree with her on that, even though I think she did not say it very well. And the second point, which I think is probably even more controversial, is this, and then I'm going to cede the floor back to you guys. I think that there is a kind of a stolen valor happening when you have these groups that represent different minorities, Jews, immigrants, Muslims, Asians, Latinos, all sort of trying to get on this, intersectional train and say, look, fighting oppression for everybody is intertwined. And I just think that that's ridiculous. Because again, like what we did and what we continue to do to the American descendants of slaves is qualitatively different. It is qualitatively worse. And to the extent that she was trying to point that out, that there is this kind of, you keep asking the Black community to lend its voice to these other things that are bad. They're bad. Anti-Semitism's bad. But come on, like, where are priorities, right? When we're thinking of levels of, oppression that still remains. So I think that those are the two things that, clumsily she was gesturing at that I do think are important to talk about. So
All right, I think the points were made clear enough. So a couple of things before we get started with the discussion, and this will be one I just want to hear from you guys, and I have a broad question, multi-tiered question, but I want to hear from you guys, period. But a few things. At the end of the Good Morning Show piece where they were putting Whoopi's plight together for us to consume, the lady actually mentions at the end that, anti-Semitism is not as understood as it once was. And she mentions that Jews are still understood to be a highly receiving of hate as a religious group. She did mention that because that's the proper context of mentioning that. So that's one thing. The complexities are abound. I don't act like they're not. I've studied some things that related to how Jews have experienced atrocities over the course of many, many, many years and thousands. But it's definitely a different time and a different take. And to that lady's point, who we just finished listening to, yeah, Whoopi could have used her that day in the studio to better communicate what she was trying to say. Lastly, I'll mention this. Many years ago, Whoopi Goldberg was dating Ted Danson, and Ted Danson did blackface. Despicable to me and unnecessary, but she co-signed it. I mean, it's a picture of her just laughing away while he's standing there, with Al Jolson makeup on. That's how vulnerable and exploited I think Black Americans are, to the point that sometimes it's not even recognized or realized by the people that are doing it. But the apologies and the punishments that follow any perceived slight against certain groups of people, you instantly try to rectify that situation. Nick Cannon comes to mind last year, whenever that was. So, yeah, we've got to find some levity in this. And I do appreciate the lady that just spoke last, that I played the last clip of, for having a realistic view of this and a understanding that there's conversations that are not being had, and we have opportunities to have them. And I think this was a moment missed with Joe and Whoopi happening near simultaneously to really have some unpacking. But instead, we get blow over and, things will get back to normal in the celebrity world because she's back on the show and, the view's back. So anyway, I'll leave it there. I'm sorry for taking up so much of the air, but I think I wanted to make sure this was framed properly. And I know, I couldn't find clips from Joe's situation to share here. So thoughts, I'll come around the space. Lisa, I seem like you had something on your mind. So any thoughts you want to share? We may get into the questions organically, but any thoughts you want to share?
Thank you. You keep I missed it. I was dealing with some stuff, so I missed that whole thing. But with what you have presented here, it again goes to the point, like you were just saying, we do get glossed over. And I do think that, no, you're not advertised as Jewish. You're not advertised as gay just from your appearance. But we, as people of Black people, not just people of color, Black people, we walk around with our advertisement of who we are and our race, and we immediately get, and I'm just going to say the majority of the time, we get our representation with the color of our skin gets us a certain treatment. And it's been that way. And to the point of what the lady was saying, that no one has made any type of amend or what is it called? Reparation or whatever for what continues to happen. So yeah, and this is no shade to anyone else's plight, but I'm with them. I don't want to be lumped in with everyone else's plight who, if they choose to hide it, they can. If they choose not to hide it, they don't have to. But there's nothing I can hide about my skin being brown. And that's, to me, it's not fair. And I always say life is not fair, but I'm going to be pretty adamant with saying, no, don't come over here with that. This is a whole different, you want to have a minority fight on your minority issue, except it's not a minority issue, because you can choose to be a part of the majority. And no one ever knows. And oftentimes people do. And there's several Jewish people who I even know who changed their names, right? And they get to hide their religion. And I do like that it was kind of slid in there that is based on religion, that they are treated a certain way. So even putting that piece in there, you don't get to come over here with this fight, because there's nothing we can do to present ourselves a certain way to get a fair shot.
Well stated. I'll say this also. I was just amazed that no one gave any consideration to Whoopi's processing of how she would come to the conclusion she did without engaging in the extreme role colorism plays in the United States. Colorism plays such a significant role, and has throughout the history of it being established and understood that if you were Black, your freedom was subject to so many so much scrutiny. Instantly, it would be assumed you were someone's property, and you had to make sure you had your papers in order to prove otherwise. But the lighter you were, the more there was a potential for you to be better received by society. So colorism has a significant place in America, and she alluded to that, or she stated it very clearly as to what she thought race was determined by when she was on the Tonight Show right after her comments on The View. Julia, you have any thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I thought I was looking at motivation. I heard bits and pieces in the news about Joe Rogan and more about the people that left Spotify, Neil Young and Brene Brown and some others. But I think Whoopi's motivation was pure. I think she recognized that they had been mistreated. It wasn't a slam. It wasn't anything. She wasn't putting down the Jewish people by saying that they weren't a race. And I think her punishment, I heard somebody describe her, and these people, Bill Maher, they go back and forth all the time, but he said, she was treated like a child, told her, go to her room and think about it. And I do think the behavior was, how she was treated was not appropriate for what was said. When she came back and said words matter and apologized, I think she meant it. And that's all I have to say. And I agree with what Lisa said. There's really not a comparison.
I appreciate that, Julia. There's a image that I often mention when it comes to what the lady that last spoke was alluding to in terms of Black struggle, Black oppression, there not being anything like it here, and other groups come in and try to align themselves. She said something really powerful that I'm not re-engaging at the moment, but she's mentioning it in terms of other groups coming in and intermixing with the Black struggle to the point that they elevate themselves by some measure. So there's an image that I recognize. I don't mind giving this out to the interweb. There's an image of a man. His name, the name that the image gave him was Whip Peter. It's a pretty popular historical photograph of a man kind of with his arm jutted out to the side. You can see his back, and his back is just whipped all up. He was a formerly enslaved person who bore the brunt of what it meant to be property, chattel slave at that point. But on his back is so much damage and so much of what this country had done to Black folks. And I have said that his back is not now to be used for other groups to ascend based on the fact that his scars never healed, which Black people were never healed from what this country put them through and has put them through and still continues to put us through, as the lady was mentioning. So yeah, there's no room on his back for anybody else right now. We have to heal those scars first. That's my take on it. Meryl, what are your thoughts about what we've looked at so far?
It's really interesting. I'm so glad that you did this today, because I like Lisa, I was not privy to most of this, Whoopi stuff, and I definitely didn't know much about the Joe stuff. My head's been buried in the sand of a bunch of different work last couple of weeks. But I guess I have more observations. I think the lesson learned here for Whoopi, um, anytime that you speak definitively about something and you're not using I statements, so she's professing to say, "Well, this is what it was about." Let's be clear. Like, that's the lesson learned when you do that. The other lesson is there's a price to pay when you're in that space, and there's a certain amount of a rope that you get when you choose to be in that space. So she was doing that same conversation on the talk on BET. It's not a story. I was struck by the folks of ABC telling the retelling of it, saying it's just shocking that she doesn't know the true history of the Holocaust. I mean, it's like, what are you talking about? You're shocked that a group of people may not have a full understanding of something that happened in the past. Really? Um, it's just really, it's comical to me. But if you're in that space, man, that's the game you play. And then the whole thing about people being on different places in their equity journey. So where Whoopi is today is not where she was 25 years ago or 30 years ago with that thing that happened with Ted Danson when she was yucking it up because like she felt like her validation was like in that space and like, you know. And then my brother that's saying that Joe can say whatever he wants to. He's in a different place in his racial identity and what he's aligned to. So it's just really interesting. And but and I did like what the lady said about anti-blackness being different than some of the struggles that other folks that have other marginalizations have to go through. Even though I'm not a big fan of like Oppression Olympics, it's just not something I like to get into. So those are the top of mind.
Yeah. I mean, good observations. Also, I'm glad we got the crowd we have tonight because, man, I think it's okay to discuss things in context, and it doesn't have to be an Oppression Olympics type discussion. And I'm not a fan of that either. But we don't need to be discouraging of a better understanding of groups that have been marginalized, groups that have been persecuted, and groups that have been made to experience Holocaust on some levels. Genocide is real, so it's fine to have those discussions. It's the as I think Julia was saying, it's the fact that there was not the egregiousness present. There was a limited knowledge. There was something wonderful that you just unpacked, Meryl. When you're absolute in your commentary and observation and not making it your opinion, you open yourself up to all kinds of pushback and potential backlash. But again, we're talking about a dark-skinned woman who did come up at a time where that probably was something that shaped her to a degree. And she played in a movie called The Color Purple that was almost perfect telling of the Black American experience at a point in time. Directed by a great filmmaker who's Jewish. There was just more conversation to be had and not this reaction of get out of here for 2 weeks. So
It felt that there's a different power. So in entertainment, TV, and Hollywood, the people who run those studios compared to the people who run sports leagues, there's a difference. So like that's something with the swiftness and the vitriol and the like, got to do it now because the head of 19 different places that have a lot of power that keep the the studios running share that religion or race, however they say it. So if somebody there is offended, you got to go. Whereas UFC, there's just a different power structure, like who makes decisions and says something's got to happen now because I've been offended. So I think some of that is part of. Now, obviously, she being sharing the Black American experience, that's definitely a factor in it. But trust me, in the entertainment
Oh no,
space,
no.
don't you dare.
Yeah, that goes
That's a
without
wrap.
saying.
That's
Yeah,
a wrap.
Yeah, studio heads and some of the controllers of media, absolutely. But I think something that even covers some of that is the conditioning factor. Something I'm always stressing in terms of how society has conditioned us to acknowledge and appreciate certain things differently. So yes, there is a complete and understood thing that exists that when you're discussing matters that are concerning Jewish people or anti-Semitism, there is the understanding that you have to be careful with what you're discussing in that capacity, because it is understood that there are people watching that want to make sure that you don't forget. That is one of the main things about the Holocaust, is not to forget what took place. And they are absolutely right in their conviction. I visited the Holocaust Museum twice, and it is a powerful space. And it is constructed for the purposes of reminding us that something took place in the 20th century that is beyond comprehension to a lot of us. And then, as a historian, as a person that acknowledges the history of racism in America, especially when it concerns Black Americans, I have the same ideas of protection for what is communicated in the public sphere. But again, that conditioning doesn't allow for that same level of protection for the Black American plight, or the plight of Black Americans, to be as protected. And that is something that we need to also unpack and discuss. There's a reason why some Black Americans and Israel the fighter, who's Nigerian, feel more than comfortable coming to the defense of someone like Joe Rogan and saying, hey, this is a good guy, he's a cool guy. They may be correct, but the reaction needs to be protective of who we are as a people and what we have endured. Even if you're not from here, it needs to be understood globally, as it is with the Jewish community, that you have to be protective of these vulnerable citizens. And that's the best way I know how to communicate that. Lisa, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, and that's an important point to me, Felton, is that as a Black American, and that person, Israel, being a person of color, it's like you're adding insult to injury because you don't even understand this plight, and you're defending something that has been and still is a weaponized entity for me personally. So in respect to, I could feel Whoopi's pain. She was probably in a defensive mode, like she's feeling something, right? I literally interviewed for a job today, and the job has an 11 county reach that if I had the job, I would have to do. When I got offered the opportunity and I saw that in the description, I had a Black American experience feeling some fright because, in the last month, my aunt was transitioning. We were dealing with hospice. A hospice nurse literally said she went to the wrong house. She had Black skin. And the white man that answered the door said, I'm about to get my gun and shoot. You don't have any business over here. So to the point that we're not in a new America, but I, as a Black person, have to still have these thoughts, even interviewing for a position that may take me to Harnett County, right? Or Lee County. And that was a recent event within this last 30 days that I know that nurse did that. And it's a similar situation where I would be interacting with people. And if I made a mistake, somebody will come after me with a gun. If I was Jewish, they wouldn't know anything about my religion, so I just feel real sensitive at the fact that a person that share my skin color, to your point, would defend without understanding this plight over here. like, okay, don't say nothing, or don't go all in like that person did. So that to me added so much more insult to injury, because this is real and present today in our lives and regularly. And until we get the support, like you're talking about, then this is just going to be, I don't know, no end in sight to me until there's something tremendous that happens in our communities.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, his defense was based on just this guy being so cool, and there was you know, what was he saying? Block out the noise. People are going to try to come and tell you this and that, and you know, you got to block out the noise. Do you know that somebody had to go through the put together this piece that have him saying the N-word all these times? Somebody had to go, and they had to have a team of people. So what? The footage exists, and nobody's saying that this guy has to disappear or go away, because context does matter. And he apologized, and he said he had stopped using the word a long time ago. Great. But if they dig up something, then the consequences that come from it should be accepted gracefully, with some apologies in tow. Because if you do compare what Whoopi said to what was dug up and displayed in Joe Rogan's behavior over numerous years, and you know, he's a comedian. Comedians and my art doesn't excuse certain behaviors. So he gets to this point now where there's some scrutiny, and he gets to escape some of it because he's got defenders that are going to get airtime, going to get elevation, because they look like somebody who should be offended, but is not. And they're celebrating and saying, hey, man, he's a good guy. So again, this conditioning that we have can't even allow for someone to say, I know him, he's a stand-up guy. It's unfortunate that he was caught saying those things. I think we can have a discussion, a conversation around why it's so wrong and why he might need to pay a penance for that, because historically this, that, or the other. But that's not what we get. We get an immediate rush to the other side of the street and say, hey, man, he's a good guy. Stand up, let him go. This is just the people trying to show some. He's my N-word. What? So what are we doing? It's despicable, and it's disgusting, and it's lazy. It's very lazy. If somebody had something else they wanted to add, go for it. But I wanted to interject something, and Meryl, you alluded to it. So this was one of the questions, and it was let's talk about social responsibility. What is it? So what is social responsibility? I'll go around, and you guys can give definition. And if somebody says that's the same one I would have give, then we fine. But Meryl, I'll start with you. What is social responsibility?
Wow. Well, I always like to start at and leaning into your humanity is a social responsibility. So trying to look at things at that angle as a default, but I don't know how I would like truly define it. I mean, like, I feel like to me, I lean into my humanity when I make decisions. I try to think about any blind spot that I have, being cognizant enough about it to where it doesn't harm people. And I think that's about it that I'm responsible for. I'm treating people the way they want to be treated, not how I want to be treated, you know? And then just being super critical about blind spots that I have across marginalizations, not allowing them to harm, especially in places where I have power. So.
Good answer. I will definitely accept that, and I'll jump out there. What's going on, Cam? Good to see you, man. I'll jump out there with this one in front of whoever else may have something to add. But I think Meryl saying considering others, just considering folks. That's so part of social responsibility is one of those C's that I used to talk about, those 3 C's, but one of them is consideration. So who intentionally goes out to do harm or present things that are so controversial that you know there's the potential to condition someone to be insensitive towards a group of people. That's a big part of what I think social responsibility is, understanding, especially when you have an audience of millions, that there is some responsibility to what you put out. And you don't get to just avoid that responsibility by saying, oh, it's my art. You know, you guys know how I feel about rap music. So yeah, same principle. Lisa, what are your thoughts? What is social responsibility?
For me, social responsibility is understanding that my perspective has an impact, positive and negative, and to weigh the risk-benefit analysis of expressing that perspective, especially publicly. And I think I mentioned this maybe a year or two before, that I have to take inventory even when I'm chided. So my teenage daughter said to me, Mother, you're racist. And what? The world? Where you're always talking about Black people this and Black people that. And I said, wait. So I said, now explain to me why that makes me racist. So instead of me jumping all over her, no, I'm not racist, da 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 da, we had to have a conversation because of her perspective. Now she's 17, she was 15 then, but the world she grew up in is different than mine. And then what I'm seeing, she saw me putting so much energy into Black issues that it made her feel like I didn't care about anybody else's issues, to the point that I would even consider hurting them, maybe. I don't know. But we had to have a conversation. I couldn't just shut her down. But she's privy to me having conversations and stuff, and that's all she heard and that's all she experienced. But I had to let her know this wasn't about oppression, right? Everything that I was doing and saying, it's not about oppressing anyone else. You just see me putting a lot of energy into uplifting someone else. But that opened up the opportunity. So if I would just shut something down, so here I'm being socially responsible within this little framework here, because she gonna take whatever she gets here and go out there. So I have to make sure I have that perspective of that influence, whether I'm in here with an audience of 1 or 5, because my 5 kids, and they all take it out to the world, or when I'm out somewhere. So it made me take inventory of the perspectives that I'm projecting, if that makes sense.
No, well stated, and I totally agree with the idea that you have to expose yourself to more intimate settings in order to kind of learn and gauge and grow in understanding what social responsibility is. You ever and Lisa, you have kids, Meryl, you have stepkids, and Julia, you have kids, so you guys know how powerful you are in the household in terms of influence. And you all have went somewhere and saw some kids just acting completely out, and you literally say, well, you know, what kind of home training that kid get? So, you know, I'm not putting that whole emphasis on it all begins at home, but it kind of does. And you can utilize those moments to better get people, and primarily the kids, to understand what social responsibility is. Acting a certain way because you observe that you have some input or output that may warrant some attention that you might not want. Go ahead, Mary.
But I just had a follow up. I'm curious, Lisa, about the responsibility that you have. It's very specific because that's your child. If a cashier that you don't know that was white said that to you, you feel you had the same responsibility to slow down and say, well, let me make sure I understand your perspective, because I feel you're racist. You're racist. So you had the same energy? I'm just curious.
No, I would not invest that much into a stranger, but I invest that into them because to Felton's point, I feel like I've been given charge to mold them to be socially responsible individuals. So to a point, my daughter came home, she works at Chick-fil-A, and she says, "Oh my God, Karen, the staff were saying someone was acting like Karen," right? And they termed it as a white lady who was complaining about her food. I said, no. So we had another conversation about how Karen, our perspective of Karen is now being mainstreamed to take away from what Karens have been doing, right? So I owe that to my daughter to say, don't fall into that. Hold up. This is what Karen is in our community, and this is why it's not good. So Karen ain't the one who bring her food back, right, at Chick-fil-A. So thanks for that question, Meryl.
Yeah, that's a really good another good observation. And yeah, I never subscribed to that Karen thing or whatever else came out, because it's kind of fleeting, and it makes light of something, and it gives us a high look at you being this, as opposed to actually doing what we're discussing somewhat, and that means holding people responsible for their social actions, social responsibility. So she gets to become a meme, and people get to laugh about Karens. I don't think that's very effective. Julia, what are your thoughts on what social responsibility is?
Good. It's such a good question, and it's so broad. Right human relations. And I really resonate with what Meryl said about harmlessness, about not being harmful. So when we were in the catering business and we had Black weddings, or no, I used another example, planning a Black Christmas party with staff, and we had, planning a Christmas party, and we had several Black staff people. And I just asked them, what would be a good, fun event for you? Not what would be fun for me. Or so I think being open to, going to a fancy restaurant was not it at all. So that's been part of it, and being part of this grown folks, and we've had the opportunity with Gregory with Circle of Protection to just learn and immerse ourselves in more of the Black experience. Not that we can even begin to know what you all have been through, but we can at least start to have a sense, so we can be sensitive. So social responsibility in that area is just being aware, being sensitive, being harmless. But I have found with some of white people that have been friends at one time may not be friends anymore, because there's had to have some courage with calling them on some behaviors and comments. So, and I think that's being socially responsible. And here's my husband. What's social responsibility to you?
Social responsibility is showing up right at the end of these Zoom calls. That's being responsible, right? I'm sorry for being late, but I was on another Zoom call. I've got to go back. It's called The Color of Education, and it's educators in Greensboro and Guilford County. And they're talking about issues around education in Guilford County. And I'm going to put a plug in for Sugar Valley Airport as a site to come and bring groups. And they don't know that yet. They don't know who I am. But I'm going to put a plug in for NC 100 as well. Good to be here tonight.
Hey, man, you just answered the question. That's a part of social responsibility. That's being actionable with your social responsibility. So you came in right in time. You slid in the home plate just under the tag. Thanks for joining us, Greg. It's always good to see you.
Absolutely.
And wonderful comments, Julia. The engagement and stepping outside of norms is important. being intentional in your interaction and your desire is important. Your desire to engage with groups that you may not otherwise do so. So you guys know we have plans coming up also for Sugar Valley, and we look forward to making another trip out there. And I'm so glad to hear that you're engaging with some local students.
Looking forward to that. Thank you.
Lisa, we want you to come out, and Danye, we want you to come out to Sugar Valley. And congratulations to Merrill.
Yes.
Woohoo.
Yes.
Yeah, he got some accolades, two
Indeed.
and all that stuff. I love the images. I'm not much for just making comments because I'll speak to you in person, and I salute you also. Very, very well done, sir. Keep up the awesome work. But yeah, man, I almost, that's a perfect ending. Nearly the last thing I was going to mention was to kind of quarter in when the type of conversation we have, and when that loss of social responsibility becomes oppressive or disparaging or degrading, and when it can be argued to be free speech. But I think we did a good enough job of understanding that there's a responsibility, period. And when I say don't just run from things and call it art or this is my truth, and that is akin to saying this is free speech. Is it harmful? So think about that social responsibility instead of that amendment that gives you the ability to say certain things. Maybe you shouldn't, and maybe you might need to go spend some time, as Julia and Gregory are speaking of, with people that you otherwise may not think about doing. It's a beautiful thing to share the human experience, and I think it makes us all better. I'm going to leave it there. Anybody have anything they want to share before we get out of here? All hearts and minds. The second time I said this today. I had a wonderful engagement earlier with the RELC community. We talked about the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment in our lunchtime chat. So, Julie and Greg, I'm not sure if you're signed up for that stuff, but I'll have to make sure I put you guys on that list. It's just more of the same, but more focused on racial equity. So,
again, a very, very wonderful show. I've got to get my daughter to chime in, but I have to tell y'all, in her room, she has the Black Lives Matter flag. She has a Stop Asian Hate painted on the wall, and then she has a rainbow flag on another wall. So great show. Thanks.
She's very social responsible. She's embracing social responsibility head on. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Julia and Greg. Meryl, appreciate you as always. Danya, great job. Everybody have a wonderful night, and thanks to whoever out there in Cyberland joined in, and I know one of them was Cam. Thanks for joining us, man. Y'all take care. Have a wonderful night.
You too. Good night.